Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's NeoSystems CMMC Town Hall. Now I'd like to introduce your host, Ed Bassett from NeoSystems. Ed?
Hi, thanks, Don, and welcome everybody to our continuing series of Town Hall Ask Me Anything sessions on cybersecurity maturity model certification. My guest today is Mike Baker, CISO from General Dynamics Information Technology, or GDIT. I just want to remind everyone that we are recording these sessions as part of our community outreach to the defense industrial base. Our focus as a managed service provider is primarily on organizations seeking certification. So if you're in the audience today and you have some questions, please do send those in on the chat within Zoom, the Zoom Q&A chat, and we will answer as many of those questions as time allows. Today we're going to get more into, I think, kind of realistic on the ground, what are people doing, real world piece. We've had a lot of conversations about what CMMC means, what it's all about, and today we're going to talk about specifics on how to react to it. My guest is Mike Baker. He's leading the cybersecurity charge for General Dynamics Information Technology for about 5 years as their CISO. Prior to that, he worked for Ernst & Young for over 13 years. So this establishes him as an industry veteran with a broad vision and a lot of real world, deep operational experience. So today we want to definitely hear Mike's views on CMMC and specifically how GDIT is reacting to it and how it's changing the cybersecurity landscape across the whole defense industrial base. So Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ed. I appreciate all the NeoSystems folks and the invite today. I know this has been, quite the topic in our industry for the last, over a year at this point in time. And, as you mentioned, for GDIT, we've been leaning in since the beginning, looking forward to, complying with this and making sure that we're in the best position possible, not only as a company, but also our supply chain as well. So again, appreciate the invite, and I hope I can, bring some value and some perspective to the conversation today.
I'm sure you will. So you're running a pretty sizable security operation, and you're also managing risk associated with a pretty large number of suppliers that work under GDIT on DoD contracts. So I think definitely want to hear your thoughts on CMMC, the benefits, the challenges, and specifically your advice to others who are seeking certification. That's mostly who's in our audience today. All those folks are tracking CMMC very, very closely to determine how it's going to impact their business, of course, and that's kind of why everybody's here, I think. But before we dive into that, I want to start with just kind of a high-level vision from you on cybersecurity within GDIT. So beyond, compliance with government mandates, CMMC being the hot topic, what are the top things that you're working to accomplish as a security leader within GDIT?
Yeah, so for good question. For people who don't know, GDIT is one part of a broader enterprise for General Dynamics. General Dynamics makes it's a traditional defense contractor. We make a number of platforms and manufacturing systems across 10 or so different businesses. GDIT itself is right around 35,000 employees, 8-ish billion in revenue. So as you mentioned, it is a pretty sizable operation. I think the uniqueness of GDIT is that we not only service DoD, but we service a ton of other, federal customers and state and local customers, which makes kind of that compliance challenge a little bit more complicated. We are traditionally a DoD business. Our heritage is within DoD, so we do, lean that direction. But we also have to have an eye towards all the other agencies and also some of the state and local and different customers that we have out there. So very unique position to be in. I think, this summer, I don't need to tell this group, it's been quite an interesting spring and summer, particularly on the cybersecurity front. So we, probably most people on this call, we went telework overnight, right there in the middle of March. Luckily, I think in our industry, we were well positioned to respond to that, outside of capacity concerns and things like that. But I think what we're seeing in the cyber industry, outside of just the threats that are emerging from COVID, which we've all seen, right, the taking advantage of certain things that are going on there. Things I'm focusing on is, really how do we lean in on that remote user and work experience, right? So we were already on the pathway to cloud and rapid cloud adoption, and this really just, it really just infused some adrenaline in that process, right? So risks that we didn't have at scale before quickly became a bigger issue. For instance, how do we manage remote workspaces and the security of, people's remote workspaces at home? how do we manage their browsing experience and their use of data and the monitoring of those data movements. Those things, while they were particularly in our company, a relatively, minor, I would say, number of users, just quickly became big overnight. So a lot of my time this summer has been focusing on that and how can we leverage the best in breed capabilities in the market to bring them to bear to answer some of these unique risks that materialize overnight. And then, while we're here today, again, a lot of my time has been spent on the CMMC front. I've always said, compliance does not equal security. I'm a former auditor saying that. I spent 13, almost 14 years of my life auditing different organizations, including General Dynamics themselves, for cyber compliance. And I saw firsthand sometimes how compliance systems don't work. So a lot of my focus this summer has really been how can we use CMMC as, I wouldn't say leverage, but an opportunity to really say, okay, this is a compliance structure, but how can we turn it to a transformational opportunity for GDIT and frankly, with the industry at large. So that's been taking up a lot of my time. There hasn't been time for much other things along with distance learning for my children here at home. So it's been a fun summer.
I'm sure challenging for all of us. I think.
Yep.
What percentage of your workforce was working remote before this all happened? Because 35,000 employees, that's a big workforce.
Yeah, it's actually very small. I don't have the exact percentage offhand, but most of our work was done in a GDIT office or at a customer site. A lot of our customers still require you to go in a customer site, but everyone who worked in a GDIT office is still encouraged to stay home. So it was a drastic change in remote work, right? And that resulted in rollout of things like Zoom overnight in a secure fashion, right? The FedRAMP version of Zoom and things like that, which have been extremely beneficial for our business. I know people, are quoted in having Zoom fatigue and things like that, but I think the rapid adoption of those tools, right, at scale was something that really allowed our users to stay connected and have a fighting chance through all this to maintain the culture that we'd worked so hard to build. So we see a lot of questions coming in already.
There are a lot of questions coming in. So yeah, keep them coming. So CMMC, it's the farthest reaching cybersecurity initiative that we've seen so far from the government. The promise is raising the security bar across 300,000 companies in the DIB. That's a huge number. It's getting a lot of attention, as you mentioned. I'm interested to hear you say that kind of up there with remote work in your top two priorities. Help to put that in context for us, I guess. Yeah, you kind of already maybe answered this question of how important is it, but how does it fundamentally change the direction and focus of your security program? So, given that the remote work thing from COVID and CMMC all are happening around the same time, maybe hard to tease those apart, but if you think about where the security program was going in 2019 and where it's going now, how has CMMC fundamentally changed that, if it has?
So, it has fundamentally changed the risk behind it, but let's just back up on CMMC. So I'm speaking for myself and myself only. I am fully in on CMMC, right? As a large prime contractor, we've had requirements in our contracts for a long time through 7012 that we have to comply with 800-171. And I do see the mission at hand. The mission is protecting controlled and classified information, right? And that is a segment of information that, we can see it. Anyone that's in this industry can see that we're losing that data and it is causing our country harm. So for me, from the spirit of CMMC, I'm 1000% behind it. And I think it's the right thing to do, at least at this point in time. So that's why early on in the process, GDIT, along with our leadership and myself, really said, hey, this is a good idea. We're going to get behind it. Now, when you say has it fundamentally changed our security program, it hasn't really for me, because we were already doing 800-171. Now, the nuance of it, obviously, for the 127 participants here is the third-party audit and attestation, where it brings in a lot of risk to your business and a lot of unknowns, and quite frankly, a lot of fear of those unknowns on how those evaluations are going to take place, how they're going to be fair, how they're going to be adjudicated, when they can take place, so on and so forth. So while it didn't fundamentally change what we were doing, it did fundamentally change how we viewed risk within our cyber program. So before, with our 800-171 application through DFARS 7012, we were free to write an SSP the way we saw fit, and we were free to maintain a POAM, plan of actions and milestones, according to some of the business decisions or technology decisions we had to make as a company. Again, I was in the unique position that, given my size and scale, I was able to comply with all of them and not maintain, a running list of POAMs into perpetuity. But I understand some of my small business partners and peers did have those, and that was perfectly acceptable for a period of time. So the change, I think, for us has come into the fact that, there is no POAM, there is no easy button. There is, quite frankly, a lessening on the importance of risk management, which I hold near and dear to my heart, and more of the pendulum swinging on the side of true compliance and third-party attested compliance, which just changes the general skill set that you need to have, right? Like, when I look at my company, I'm not only looking at how great are my controls and how defensible are my controls, I'm also looking at how good is my staff going to be at, working with assessors to get them there as well. I mean, that's a unique skill set that all cyber teams don't have. So I think we all really in the industry need to prepare for that, because people who are doing the practices and executing the programs, take it from someone who's been there, are fundamentally different than the people who are assessing the programs. And there's always a bridge that you need to cross there, with those assessors that I think can be challenging for some teams. So I think we all need to plan for that.
There's an interesting trade-off there, because, right, I mean, as you mentioned, the shift of the risk acceptance decision making, if you will, right? So, there's with having someone like yourself making those risk decisions, or your bosses potentially, it might escalate to that level depending on the type of risk. That you have intimate knowledge of what's going on and what's behind that risk, and yet the other side of that, the dark side, is that maybe sometimes, because you have self-interest involved, there's a tendency to cheat. Some people will cheat on their risk acceptance evaluation, right? Of even risks themselves. Whereas now that's been shifted over to an assessor who doesn't know anything about. You're just another gig for them, right? They don't know anything about your systems necessarily, or the impacts on your business, and but they're making that in a very impartial way. So I think that is a fundamental change, and I think we have yet to see what real effect that's going to have. The elimination of POAM means that their latitude to accept risk is much more restricted than it ever has been before. And I've had this,
it's 100% restricted. Like, it's you're handcuffed on the 110, and there are some controls, at least in 171, not the CMMC standard, that are extremely challenging for small businesses to abide by, right? And if you've been subjected to 7012, you have 110 requirements. If you come out CMMC level 1, you have 17, right? So, CMMC does represent a little bit of a paradigm shift in terms of how our industry is going to comply, rather than just blanket throwing 7012 on every defense contract and expecting people to attest, no matter what the size of their company, to those 110. That's pretty complicated, but you talk about risk management, and that's what I feel is like my core skill set. I'm not the most technical CISO out there, but I do come from a risk assessment background. And, for us, our company values are honesty, trust, transparency, and alignment, right? So that, to me, matches up with how we do risk, right? Risk is all about having the conversation. It's all about our executives making informed business decisions with the resources that they have. We're not always going to have the money or the resources or the people to get, the Cadillac of security tools, right? So we have to make that informed decisions. And I find as my personal obligation within my company to give my global CIO or the president of my company kind of the tools they're needed to make those decisions. Just not there's not going to be those levers you can pull, but I also don't see that as a bad thing, right? We need to be doing the best we can to protect CUI, regardless of that. And like, I do see people in the industry hiding behind the POAM, and I'll be
Sure.
glad to see that go away with CMMC.
Yeah, definitely some of that going on. I mean, one of the things we've heard from DoD is that they expect that large prime contractors like yourselves are pretty solid already, right? The investments have been made, and that security is there. And I think you're kind of confirming that here today, that you had that compliance going in. So CMMC is although changing the focus around risk and a few other things you mentioned, it's not fundamentally raising the bar in terms of the amount of security that you're going to do. But not necessarily true from the supply chain. And we've got some really, good research that says that a lot of the companies making up the DIB have not been able to make those big investments that the large primes have made, and are not in as good a place. So DoD and coming from Honorable Ellen Lord at the very high level within the DoD, she stated that she expects the larger and more mature defense industrial base companies will have an obligation to guide and mentor their suppliers. So we've seen a lot of activity in this regard from primes. Some are ringing the bell, just kind of bringing attention to the concept. Some are doing a lot of education. What specifically are you doing at GDIT with respect to lowering cybersecurity risk within your supply chain?
Yeah, so I think the first and foremost, secure supply chain, you gotta start a tone from the top. Secure supply chain is a business risk at GDIT, right? It's not a cyber risk. It's not something that sits in the dark corner of the SOC, right? This is something that's known, shared, understood up to the president of our company through our chief supply chain officer, who also happens to be our CIO. That also helps. And also is paramount on a very close teaming relationship that I have with my supply chain officer, our deputy supply chain officer, and also our contracts organization, right? So at GDIT, we're professional services. So a lot of our supply chain is some goods and materials, right? But a lot of that's off the shelf stuff that may not be applicable to CMMC, but a lot of small companies in the subcontracting space. So when I look at secure supply chain for GDIT, as a business risk, I went very early and I said, hey, look, this is a serious problem. We have a lot of programs with small subcontractors. It could be subcontractors that have a lot of the intellectual property or things that we need to execute on that work, and we need to get ahead of this right away. So to your point, I mean, our biggest strategy has been to engage, right, through outreach. We do have certain levers we could pull, Ed, in the case of an emergency. If a subcontractor like that's super critical says, hey, I just can't make it there, right? In that case, would it be appropriate to provide them the tools needed to come within our boundary and consume data within our boundary? Perhaps, but my challenge with that is I have a hard time doing that at scale, right? Managing those identities at scale and so on and so forth. So I view that as kind of the last possible recourse. Now, my number one strategy is to get out there. So at GDIT, the first thing we did was take a leadership position with our supply chain, make sure that we are available to do broad supplier outreach sessions. And we've done a few of those. We paused them while they were changing the DFARS that just came out last week. We're about to kick those back up again because it came to a point where we're just saying the same thing about CMMC month after month, right? Secondly, the biggest thing for us is within our business to prioritize the subcontractors, suppliers that we're going to directly engage with. So that's pretty easy in theory, hard in practice, right? You got to follow the CUI. It's like a puzzle. So we have in my company an ability to understand what programs deal with either stated CUI or assumed CUI. And I have to say that because none of us know exactly what it is because we can't rely on just the markings right now.
Not always marked, right?
Right. We are on the side of caution. We said this looks like CUI, feels like CUI, or it's marked CUI. We understand what those programs are. We understand where their recompetes are, or perhaps large contract mods, and we directly engage them through letters and things like that, and an opportunity to talk with us one-on-one. And the challenge we've had, interestingly enough, I work with my counterpart Dan Alves, who runs all of our IT risk and compliance. We were scared at some point that perhaps we didn't have enough bandwidth or cycles to engage all these subcontractors. They'll be knocking down our door to ask for advice on CMMC. But you'd actually be surprised that we have not gotten much interaction back, which to me is it's quite scary, number one. Number two, I'm trying to figure out what the next step is. So we have executed direct outreach on hundreds of subcontractors and suppliers. We've gotten the word out. We've talked about what our expectations are as a company, to a point of one of these questions here in the window. We're going to be sending out letters and updating our reps and certs for, the new DFARS rules that just came out 2 weeks ago. So interestingly enough, we've engaged, we've had some engagement back, but it has not been kind of the groundswell that I had expected, which, to me, sitting on, the phone today, if you do business with GDIT, please reach out to us, right? Because we want to engage and walk you through the process and what it means to us to be ready for CMMC.
So Mike, you mentioned the interim rule, and it just came out, and there's a few audience questions on that, as you mentioned. So, yeah, first question that I see here is, how is that rule affecting the CMMC requirements? Another rule is, another question is, how does GDIT ensure that suppliers have a current DoD assessment score? So those scores get reported to SPRS. It's a DoD system. DoD can see the score, but you can't see the score. So nobody else can. Exactly. It's not private. It's not public, right? So yeah, what are you doing around those new requirements? That's going to be a faster reporting. It's going to be a faster rollout than CMMC,
right.
and maybe get people's attention quicker than a CMMC audit.
Like, I'm not a contracts guy. I'm not going to pretend to be a contracts guy. So, I'm not going to overcomplicate it, right? We are GDIT right now for 7012 already asks all of our suppliers or anyone who's subjected to 7012 in our reps and certs, do you have an SSP? Do you have a POAM? Are you compliant with all the controls? Do you have a medium assurance certificate? And can you report within 72 hours, right? I think I got all 5 of those, right? Through those 5 questions, we are able to deduce within our supply base and our subcontractor base who understands what they're talking about, right? Because the way that those questions can come back, we can kind of assume that if they're answered incorrectly, we should probably engage those. We've been doing those for a while, right? So for me, at least on 7019, as it relates to the basic assessment scores in SPRS, we're just going to ask the people. We're going to ask our business partners, right? And we're going to ask them if they have a score in SPRS and what that score is. Because we don't really have any other choice. I don't see it as fundamentally that much different than 7012. The only difference is the logistics around companies getting access to SPRS, getting in there, lining up their cage codes, inputting their basic assessment score. But in the end, it's still self-accreditation, right? It's just a different way to do that. Now, I think we all need to be thinking in industry is what our customer is going to do with that data. They're fully entitled to that data, right? It's in the contract. But now that it's right in front of them in terms of both our companies and our supply chains, I think there's a lot of questions out there in industry right now of what's kind of the recourse of that data. Is it information gathering? Is there going to be different decisions based on those assessment scores? I don't have the answer to that. But my focus right now is, when 7019 kind of comes down here at the end of next month, is working within the supply chain to make sure that they're in SPRS, they're asking the right questions, and they've inputted what they feel is an accurate and defensible score.
Sounds good. I mean, and then, yeah, the message you take away from that score, if it's high or if it's low, obviously if they're reporting a really low score and still, having sort of the guts to post that, right? It's like, well, what does that mean exactly? Does it mean they really may be a fundamental misunderstanding of what those requirements look like?
Yeah, we've always been asking yes or no on NIST 800-171, right? Now I'm just going to ask for a number. And for me, again, aligned with our values, I want to know what the real number is. I would rather you tell me you're 92 instead of 108. Right? And if you tell me if you're 92, it gives us a chance as a business partnership to come together and understand what we can do to shore up our collective responsibility to our customer, first and foremost, right? And it gives us additional levers we can pull, right? So like if you go back to CMMC, the whole point of this is to reduce the proliferation of CUI. It's not to annoy CISOs and CIOs, it's not to just put work on people. It's basically, hey, we're going to put these requirements in. If you touch CUI, you're 110. If you don't touch CUI, you're 17. I mean, there's a world of difference between that, right? So what all of us should be thinking about is, where is the CUI? Engaging the customer on whether something is CUI. Have we invested in the tools, either manually or automatic, depending on what you can, to know where it is within your boundary? And can you prevent it from being passed down your supply chain if it doesn't absolutely need to be? Right? So that's where I think we need to go to the root of the issue here and say, okay, you're a 92, but I don't give you CUI. In that case, you're damn good, right? You're 92 out of potentially 17 ultimately when it comes down to it, right? I understand that there's nuances with 70-12, so I'm not like dismissing the obligation of 110, but it just gives us a different way to think about it and understand and engage. And it all starts with being open, honest, transparent, and aligned within the supply chain to say, this is my real score. Let's get together and figure it out. If you're a 2-person company and you come to me and you say, my budget is this, I'm having a really hard time doing this, then we can actually have a conversation, right? If we don't know, we don't know.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and ask about the IT, so the IT side of this. So you work in a company that focuses on IT transformation as your core business. Want to get your perspective on the intersection between that IT transformation and what we're doing around cybersecurity maturity. So as we've been leading clients down the CMMC path, one of the things that we're finding is that for many, CMMC is more than just a security overlay. It's really causing people to kind of rethink their entire IT strategy. So, the process maturity requirements that are in CMMC, they're above and beyond what especially a lot of smaller organizations find that they need to effectively manage their IT systems, right? So it's a security driver. But when you add that CMMC level security rigor, you try to add that to legacy systems, often that's not the best path. And so things like modernization, cloud migration, outsourcing of IT management, all these things are on the table as part of the reaction to CMMC. Are you seeing IT improvements as either, I'll say, necessary or beneficial as part of raising that cybersecurity bar?
Yeah.
And do you think that is an intended and beneficial consequence of CMMC, or just something that's emerging here?
I think one of the challenges with CMMC that's well known is it doesn't really hit cloud directly, right? And people have talked about this in industry. When I look at our personal internal IT transformation, it's a lot around cloud, AI, big data, and being smarter about our data, right? So there's like those couple things together. Now, CMMC inherently isn't terribly cloud focused, and I think that's a limitation of it, and I'm sure they're going to address it based on industry feedback. Now, at the cheapest level, it makes investments in cyber really easy to justify, right? Depending on how your company views cyber, right? You come and say, look, if you want to do business with the DoD, we must do this. Period. End of story. There's really no recourse outside of that. I think that's a little short-sighted, but it's certainly a lever that can be pulled at different companies. If you want to do business with the DoD or with DoD contractors, this is something you have to do. Now, for me, from a transformational perspective, it's really shot adrenaline in our data story. So cloud's over here, and yeah, I get it, right? We're still relying on FedRAMP and some of this other stuff. CMMC is not really playing in that space at this point in time. However, I've been pushing, and a lot of companies have been pushing, again, we have to be smarter about our data. Not only GDIT's data, but our customers' data. And that would be, CUI, obviously primarily for CMMC, other sorts of data that causes risk or harm to our customer that we take custody of. And we've been dancing around the data story for a while. A lot of companies will choose, well, we're just going to choose the highest bar of security that's required by regulation. Everything in the boundary is it, right? And the only way to get out of that is to bifurcate the data sets. And that's a really hard question to get. It's a really hard thing to get to. So what I'm seeing within my IT shop is a renewed commitment to data. And the carrot at the end of the stick here is, can we focus investments where the data is more highly regulated or things like that, rather than just spreading the high investments across everything, including the lunch menu and everything else that's on our network, right? Even GDIT data, right, as opposed to customer data. So from a transformational perspective, I saw immediate alignment between my IT operations shop, my cyber shop, our leadership on the need to get smarter about our data. So that's engaging the Microsofts of the world, the Amazons, the different data protection companies, to figure out how we can get smarter there and have a better story. So that's kind of been the biggest thing for me with CMMC, as opposed to just saying, cyber continues to be a big deal to do business with DoD.
That's really good insight, I think, for sure. And I think there's a lot of emphasis, has to be a lot of emphasis on spending. We all have limited resources, right? So we have to have emphasis on spending the money to protect the things that we really are trying to protect. It isn't the lunch menu. It's the other stuff. And so understanding where that stuff is and making sure the protection is there. The protecting everything by definition means you're protecting the sensitive stuff less than you could be, right? Because you have spent some of that money over here protecting some stuff that really didn't need it.
Or the non-sensitive stuff as much as the sensitive stuff,
right?
So, there's a lot of issues with that in terms of, and most people on the call, I'm sure, are familiar with, authorization boundaries and enclave strategies and things like that. If you're doing a boundary or enclave strategy that's not rooted in a really good story of where your data lives and where your high value assets are, then it just kind of falls flat on its face in the face of CMMC. So for us, it's been all about, at least for CMMC. Now we deal with a lot of other data that worries me sick, but first is chasing the CUI, right? And that starts with engaging with the customer, number one. Hey, is this CUI? Does it look like CUI? Does it feel like CUI is a mark? Number two, maybe making some assumptions on our end, right? Whether it is CUI or whether we generate CUI, and where that should go and how that should be protected, how it should be tagged. And because again, if you don't have the inventory of where that data is, there's no way to focus the protections against it.
Agreed. So Mike, we're just about out of time. I want to ask one audience question. These 30 minutes, they go quick. We're going to run over a couple minutes today. So first audience question I want to squeeze in here is somebody's asking if you could repeat the 5 questions that you asked to your suppliers. I think those were pretty interesting.
Do you have an SSP? Do you have a POAM? Number one, are you compliant with all the controls, 110 controls? Do you have a medium assurance certificate? And can you respond to cyber incidents within 72 hours? I believe those are the big 5 tenets of 7012. And like I said, if they say no or yes to some of those questions, you can kind of make a judgment call of whether they understand the true requirements of 7012 and 171.
Yep. 7012 has some cloud requirements too. So you might need a 6th question for your cloud strategy. I don't know. If
Nobody's perfect, right?
I like the 5. It's really concise. So kind of a wrap-up question to kind of close things out today. So, DoD, CMMC accreditation body, all those guys are working pretty hard to flesh out the details of CMMC. They're listening a lot to inputs. These new DFARS rules that we talked about, they're open for public comment. We've had pretty large audience on these sessions with people eager to learn. So there's a lot of listening going on all around. So just to kind of wrap us up, what's your number one piece of advice related to CMMC initiative? I guess specifically something about the program that you'd like to amplify or potentially suggest a change to.
Yeah, so I think number one, and I got a little extra time, so I can just continue to do on this. Number one is I think we need to let things develop, right? I think people are hyper-focused on criticizing the CMMC AB to a certain degree. This is an all-volunteer group. And quite frankly, it's a thankless task, and they almost were given an impossible mission to a certain degree. So they're doing a heck of a job from what I see externally. Now, it's certainly not perfect, and certainly had its stumbles, but a program of this size is always going to have that. For me, my number one thing is to continue to do things like this, right? To be on town halls and forums, keep up with the speaking schedules of different experts in the industry, because it is so fast moving and fast paced, right? And then my thing is form the relationships within your company, right? Depending on the size of it, with the different stakeholders. I found that some of the challenges are cyber's just sitting on an island saying, oh, we can just put these controls in, but I don't really know much about supply chain. Or number two, right, I can put these controls in, but I'm not sure how it flows down the contracts. Get everyone in the room and start talking about this, and make sure that you have the proper internal education going on within your company to make sure that you can make positive change and you can have a cohesive response. Because if you put the controls in place, but contracts isn't on board, you're going to fail. If you put the controls in place and the requirements in place and supply chain doesn't know what's going on, your company's going to fail. So get everyone on board. I think that's my number one piece of advice. And if we have to go, michael.baker@gdit.com. If anyone wants to hit me up with follow-up questions, I love to engage on this sort of stuff. So please don't hesitate to email me.
Great offer, really good insight, Mike. Thanks very much for taking some time today. We had a lot of questions come in from the audience, which I'm not going to get a chance to get to on this segment, unfortunately. But keep attending. We're doing these every week, and hopefully we'll get we'll get to the things of interest. Somebody asked about getting a recording. So we do keep recordings of these all the past town hall sessions on our website, neosystemscorp.com. And there's a resources tab there that will get you to our library of on-demand. And they're all listed out with the date and the guest and the topic we were talking about. So hopefully you can find what you're looking for there. Do please join us for future town hall meetings. Our next session is Wednesday, October 28th at 1 p.m. Eastern. And I want to mention real quickly 2 upcoming virtual events we have. Next week, we have Uniting Women in Cyber, October 26th to 28th, with a really packed agenda of people speaking about CMMC, as well as kind of a broad spectrum of cybersecurity topics. We also have a Cybersecurity Summit. It's a one-day session we're doing in conjunction with Federal Publication Seminars. That is on November 17th. And if you need information on how to get registered for either of those events, please go to our website, neosystemscorp.com. Thanks to everyone in the audience. Thank you, Mike, for taking time out today.
Thank you, Ed. And I get one plug too, gdit womenintech.com. We're holding a Women in Technology Forum. It's free on October 29th if anyone wants to join that as well and sign up. So again, thanks for having me, NeoSystems, and anyone in the audience, feel free to reach out with follow-up questions.
Thanks all.
Thank you.